Chapter 2 of The Mystery at Number 6. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Mystery at Number 6 by Augusta Huiell Seaman. Village Gossip. Bernice drove back to town and straight to the doctor's office. Sydney, meanwhile, had so far recovered that he declared that there was really no need of a doctor's attention for him, and the physician himself verified this after he had examined the wound. "Simply grazed your arm with his head," he laughed. "Not a particle of venom in those hog-nosed rascals. In fact, they haven't any fangs. But they certainly do look formidable, the big ones. Gave you a scare, I reckon. But whoever fixed you up did it quite scientifically. If it had been a rattler, you would have run a fair chance of getting over it with that tourniquet." "Know anything about those folks out at old Number 6? inquired Sydney casually. "That's where we were fishing this afternoon." "Don't know much about this region, only came here lately from Jacksonville to help with the mine men," averred Dr. Bennett. "Never been out to Number 6 or even heard of it. One of those worked-out mines, isn't it?" "It hasn't been worked for 15 years or so," replied Sydney. "Well, I don't get round much to such out-of-the-way places, even to fish. The active mines keep me so busy I can hardly sleep. This blasting plays the mischief all the time. Men get so careless with the dynamite. Only yesterday a dozen of 'em didn't get out of range fast enough up to Number 10, and they got caught in the blast, and every one of 'em knocked galley west. I had a pretty time of it with 'em. Managed to keep 'em all out of Kingdom Come, but they needed some patching up. I haven't time to mosey out fishing and that sort of thing." "No help there," remarked Sydney when they got outside. "Thought surely you'd know a thing or two about Number 6, being a doctor and going round so much. But we'll get at it somehow. There must be someone in this town that knows it. They're wise about everything else there is to know of the life history of the inhabitants for miles around." "Suppose we try Caswell's general store," suggested Bernice. "Mr. Caswell knows the whole neighbourhood too, and everyone goes there for supplies. He ought to be able to tell us something. Let's go in and get some packages of chocolate. I can't think of anything else to ask for, and I'm crazy to find out who that queer girl can be. She sort of fascinated me. There was something very curious about her looks and manner." They drew the Ford up in front of the big general store, or commissariat, and entered hopefully. Bernice purchased half a dozen packages of chocolate, and while they were being wrapped, Sydney engaged the stout, inert, and good-natured Mr. Caswell in conversation. "Been up to old Number 6 fishing lately?" he inquired nonchalantly. "I had pretty good luck there today. Never saw a hole so chock full of fish." "No, I ain't been up there in a dog's age. Too far to go, and my little tin Lizzie's out of commission lately anyhow. Caught a good mess over at Number 3 yesterday." "Do you know who's living in the old farmhouse out at 6?" went on Sydney. "Seems to be inhabited now, though I never saw anyone in it before." "Well, you don't tell. Sure enough, I've not heard tell there was anyone in there either. That place belongs to old Doc Halsey over to Bartow. He's that mean he never would do any repairs on it, and so he ain't had anyone to live in it these 5 years past. Told me a year ago he was going to pull the old thing down and sell the lumber. Well, well, so he's got a tenant, has he? Can't be a very particular one to live there." "At least we've found out one thing," cried Bernice when they were out of the store. "We know who owns the old place, and of course he'll know who his tenant is. Let's go over to Bartow tomorrow and find out." But Sydney drew the line at this. "How in the world do you expect to tackle him, anyway?" he argued indignantly. "What excuse would you have for running over there and taking up his time asking such a fool question? It's none of our business, if you come to that." "It certainly is our business if we want to find out who the girl is that was so kind. contradicted Bernice. "We ought to do something for her anyway, to show our gratitude. It would be rather awkward if we don't even know who she is, wouldn't it?" But Sydney was not to be so easily convinced. He was adamant on the subject of visiting Dr. Halsey and questioning him about his new tenants. The cousins, however, were spared the necessity by something that happened that very evening. They had gone together to the early moving picture show, and when it was over Sydney suggested that they repair to the Orange Blossom Cafe and have some soda. Now the Orange Blossom Cafe was a town institution. It was the one establishment in the village where ice cream and soda water were dispensed, where candy and cigars could be bought, where one could obtain something approaching a restaurant meal, though it approached this no closer than fried ham and eggs and bacon and ham sandwiches and coffee, usually the only commodities on the bill of fare. But it was the great gathering place of the town, and around its 4 or 5 little tables, or over its sloppy soft drink counter, were retailed all the news and gossip within a radius of 30 miles of the centre. Bernice and Sydney seated themselves at one of the little tables and gave their orders to the worried-looking, white-aproned boy who attended to such matters. But before it had even been delivered, Sydney, who had been gazing purposefully around at the occupants of the place, hailed someone sitting over in a far corner, in a chair tilted against the wall. "That's Ike Massey," he whispered to Bernice. "I'd be willing to wager he can tell a few things about Number 6. He knows everything. Oh, Ike, come over here and have some ice cream with us, won't you?" Nothing loath, Ike got up and slouched over to their table with a pleased grin. He was a village character, red-haired, good-natured, always wearing a cheerful grin, boastful and lazy, and of no particular occupation that anyone had ever heard of. His chief interest in life was fishing and hunting, and he had whipped every pool and river in that part of Florida times without number. He made an ideal companion for a day's sport, but was of no other earthly use except as a purveyor of village gossip, of which he had always an inexhaustible supply. "Been fishing anywhere lately, Ike?" began Sydney, opening up at once the subject he knew was nearest to Ike's heart. "Well, I've been over to the Peace River for the last day or two," acknowledged Ike. "Kind of tired of these pools and wanted a different kind of sport. Good catching over there. Reckon I landed 30 or 40 in one morning. Sold them in Fort Meade and got myself a new rod and reel." "I was over at old Number 6 this afternoon," Sydney contributed. "Shot 'em up a bit the way I showed you last week. Good going, too. But, by the way, Ike, did you know there's someone living at the old farmhouse there? Quite surprised me to see someone in it." Ike Massey looked at him thoughtfully before replying, and took a large mouthful of cream. "Know who it is?" he queried between spoonfuls. "No, didn't see anyone but a girl about Bernice's age, I should think. Queer little specimen." Ike continued to imbibe ice cream for an appreciable interval. Finally he spoke. "I was over to Number 6 myself about a week ago. Not much luck. Weather too cool and fish weren't biting." He paused in his leisurely way and surrounded another huge spoonful of ice cream. These intervals were maddening to his two interlocutors, but they knew there was no way to make him come to the point other than simply to wait. "Seen someone in the old house myself," he went on at last. "Couldn't quite make things out at first." He scraped the last drops of cream from the bottom of his dish and then sat back, staring silently and somewhat mournfully at the empty plate. "Have another plate of cream, Ike," urged Sydney warmly and purposefully. "It's a hot night and these dishes don't amount to anything at all. I'm going to have another myself." "All right, thank you. Don't mind if I do." And Sydney gave the order, trusting that a fresh supply would bring forth fresh information. Ike began on his new plate with unabated vigour and was in no condition to talk for a moment or two. "Well, as I was saying, the fishing up to Number 6 was pretty poor last week." I don't know what got into 'em. I don't reckon I brought home 4 for the whole day at it." "That's so. You say you saw someone in the old house?" questioned Sydney, patiently herding him round to the subject again. "I certainly seen signs that it was inhabited, ferns on the porch and all that. And finally, as my water bowl was plumb empty, I reckoned I'd go and ask for a fresh supply." "Did you get it?" demanded Sydney, with more anxiety than the subject called for, apparently. I eyed him with some curiosity. "Sure I got it. It'd be queer sort of folk that'd refuse a feller a drink of water." Fat cracker woman came to the door when I knocked. I was sure I'd seen her somewheres else before. While I was pumping, I asked her didn't she come from down Fort Myers way, and she said yes. Asked her what she was doing so far from home, and she laughed and said she's married now and come up here to live. Well, I sort of gave her all the good wishes of the season, and says might I make so bold as to ask who she married, and she said she married that Everglades guide that used to be so well known a while back, Jerry Sawgrass. I says this is a long way from the Glades for Jerry to live, and she says yes, and then looks kind of embarrassed like and says he ain't so well now, and the Glades don't agree with him no more, so he's settled here. And all the time keeping one eye indoors, kind of anxiously, as if she didn't want someone in there to hear, or something like that. All of a sudden that there young kid comes running round the corner of the house, and the cracker woman, when she sees her, she hollers for her to go fetch some firewood, and so the kid disappears again. And I says to her, "That's your gal?" And she says, "No, she's a sort of niece of Jerry's or something like that." Anyhow, I was filled up by that time and wanted to get back to fish, so I says good day, and that's all I know about 'em, except when I was over to Peace River the other day, I met up with a feller that had known Jerry in the Glades, and he says he don't believe that kid's any niece of his, that Jerry is a half-breed Indian anyhow, and he thinks the kid ain't, and no one knows where she really come from and when Jerry... At this juncture I spied a crony just entering the cafe, and shouted across the place, "Hey, Doug, want to see you a minute about that gun we was going to swap." And to the cousins, "Thank you all for your company and the ice cream. Mighty good of you. Got to see that fella right off before he gets away. He's trying to duck me if he can. So long." He left them precipitately, and 2 minutes later was out of the cafe. "Pity you didn't finish that last remark," exclaimed Sydney. "But anyway, we got about what we wanted. What do you think of it, Bernice?" Bernice sat staring wide-eyed and unseeingly before her for the space of several moments. Finally she spoke. "What did I tell you, Sid? There's something queer about that girl. I knew it the first minute I laid eyes on her. There's a mystery somewhere. Oh, when can we go out there again?" "I can't go out there for a couple of days," replied her cousin, "so you'll just have to possess your soul in patience till then." Chapter 2